Here earlier, I'm Taruin, as Barbara said. I lead the restoration agenda here in WWF Brazil, and it's our honor to have all these panelists here together with us. We are excited to start the Restoration Day with these high-level discussions. I think we'll bring some really valuable discussions on the role of restoration as a nature-based solution, not only for the climate discussions that we are facing here in COP, but also for the three Rio conventions. Restoration is one of the solutions that we deliver social benefits and development, but also biodiversity results and biodiversity impact together with climate solutions and climate impact as well. So we'll have a starting session, and we'll be both in Portuguese and in English. We do have translation, live translation in here. So if you want to reach out to the girls in the back, you can have the equipment to hear the live translation. And thanks for the ones online with us to join. I'll be sharing the entire day with Barbara. Barbara has been our super supporter here on the restoration. She is our carbon expert, but also she's deep in dive on restoration, as I hope everyone in here will do it today. So we'll start with an overview of restoration, of WWF role, and of what we are discussing here in the Restoration Day. And before we move to our remarkable panelists to opening remarks, I just wanted to thank and reinforce that the Restoration Day is scaling restoration as a high-integrity nature-based solution from policy to finance and action is a day co-hosted by WWF, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, the Brazilian Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, the GPFLR, the Global Partnership on Forest Landscape Restoration, and UNEP, who has been a huge supporter for us as well. So this is a day where we hope we exchange between the different sectors. This is a day where we hope all the panelists, but also the focal points that are here hearing us, are able to reach out, and you are welcome to join us to a drinking session and networking session at 7:30 here in the Restoration House right there. So we'll move along to start the day and invite Kirsten Schutz. She's the Director General of WWF International. And Kirsten, it's such a pleasure to have you here. You are an international leader. You lead the global conservation and restoration strategy across all of these amazing teams that we have in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and in Europe. And I know you have more than 25 years of expertise in experiencing not only in international conservation, but also the national approaches that you led. And the Netherlands has been a strong supporter for Brazil as well. And I think this brings a heart connection for us and for the opening remarks that you are bringing here. And not only that, but we'll have a panel with a lot of scientific approach, because we have a special envy here from the UK that you get to know in a bit. And Kirsten has also a PhD in environmental science. So restoration is all about the practice, is all about the science, but it's all about the people as well. So with no further delays, I will invite you, Kirsten, to the opening remarks of the day. Please, welcome.
Thank you so much. And thank you. So it's really great to be opening the Forest Restoration Day. Yesterday was Forest Action Day, which was also very exciting. But what's most exciting to me, I think, about forest restoration is that it tells a positive story. And I've been working, as you said, I've been working in conservation for a long, long time. And actually, I have my roots as well in forests and in forest landscape restoration. And it's something that we've been doing for decades as WWF across the globe. What's really nice about restoration, like I said, it tells a positive story about resilience. And so we're doing this work. Yes, it's about climate change, and it's about building back carbon sinks, which is forest playing such a key role in mitigating and adapting to climate change. But of course, it also has massive biodiversity benefits, especially when you restore forests in corridors and connecting protected areas, which allow species to migrate. And it plays a key role in livelihoods. So especially when you deeply engage communities in forest landscape restoration and they actually see the benefits of doing the forest landscape restoration, you're actually tackling the three things. You're tackling climate change, mitigation and adaptation, you're tackling biodiversity conservation, and you're tackling the issue around dealing with livelihoods and economic development. So this is why forest landscape restoration is one of the key programs in our forest team, and it has been in many parts of the world, especially, of course, in the three basins when you talk about the Amazon, but also in Borneo and large parts of Africa. So really excited to be here. I want to thank all our partners. I want to thank all of you for spending the day with us today. I know it's going to be really exciting. We have lots of great speakers. We're going to be learning a lot, but also listening to you. And yeah, I'm going to hand over to Mauricio to say a few words. So yeah, thank you so much, and I look forward to participating in it. Thank you. Turn around with the cable.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. You have been a true champion in this agenda, in the network and globally, so it is super happy to have you here. Thank you so much. And I'm excited with the day. We are starting this full day on forest restoration, which is amazing to have this in COP30. The importance of this agenda has been growing a long time. Maybe 5 years ago in a COP, you'd have like one other event on forest restoration, if as much. And actually now it has become, and it's being recognized as a major global solution for climate change. And also the scale has moved from pilot projects to really large-scale intervention. We are seeing more and more finance, policies, programs all over the world. And I think Brazil is one of the countries that is also leading this agenda. And so I'm super excited that we are having this conversation and starting the day with a super high-level panel with representatives of global organizations, Brazilian government that will be setting the frame for the day, particularly focusing on this coherence between, policies, finance, implementation at scale, and how we move forward. So I'm really looking forward for the discussion we have right now. I will call each of the panelists, and I'm sorry, but I don't want to say anything wrong. So I'll start calling Mirei Atala, who is the Chief of Adaptation and Resilient Branch at UNEP. Thank you so much. I'm also calling Marshall Bernot, the Team Leader and Senior Natural Resource Officer Climate Change at FAO. Rita Mesquita, our good friend and Secretary of Biodiversity and Forests of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, the Brazilian government. Thank you, Rita, for coming. Huh? And animal rights, right? Sorry, yes. And Anjali is also, yes, sorry. And Anjali Goswami, sorry, and who is the DEFRA's Chief Scientific Advisor on the government of UK. Thank you so much. Okay, so this is how, and sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Mauricio Vojvodic, and I'm the Executive Director of WWF Brazil, and I'll be moderating this panel. The way we're going to do this is we are going to have a first round of interventions from each of you, which could be around 8 minutes, 7 to 8 minutes. And then after that, I will bring 1 or 2 questions depending on time. And if we have time in the end, we will open for questions from the plenary. I will, sorry, there's so many. I will start with Mireille. So the first question is, what are the most important enablers countries need now to accelerate restoration fully at scale, to be large-scale implementation ready in the second half of the decade to achieve the huge ambitions we have? What's UNEP's vision for the synergies agenda and restoration as a nature-based solution? So you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And maybe I won't take full 8 minutes to start so that we can have a little bit more of a dialogue.
Thanks.
It's my great pleasure to be here and really very grateful for the WWF team for organizing this. I had the pleasure also of visiting one of the very first World Restoration flagships in the Mata Atlantica. And as the co-host of the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, I really want to acknowledge WWF's role in bringing the restoration agenda at the time when the Global Biodiversity Framework was being negotiated. WWF facilitated a lot of the exchanges and discussions around making that happen. And maybe this is one of the very first enablers, is an acknowledgement in the global frameworks, whether it's the GBF, and currently we have the negotiations ongoing on the global goal on adaptation, is that when we have that policy signal at a global level, it enables a movement to take place. But that also connects to the national level, and that policy signal needs to be reflected at the national level. And I think that here in Brazil and in Belém, we have a very strong direction that is being given for restoration to move forward. And maybe one of the strong takeaways that I had from the Mata Atlantica is that policy is important, but partnership is probably more important. The display of partnership and collaboration across the three countries, across the private sector, the landowners, the civil society organizations, is really something that contributed to the fact that the Mata Atlantica was designated among the very first, it was one of a few first World Restoration flagships that has also demonstrated impact. And in that sense, I think that it's also important to keep in mind that policy, when it's set, should not be cast in stone and should have some sort of a learning and feedback loops and mechanisms. Because maybe we start, when one thinks about restoration, we always start with planting trees, maybe planting the easiest trees, and then slowly we start looking into reintegration of species or rewetting of wetlands and assemblages of species that maybe are more complicated and complex to put forward and to survive than if it were, just a blanket approach of a single, tree planting exercise. And so here I think that the second enabler that I would like to focus on, and maybe our colleague here on the panel will also reflect on that, Anjali, is the connection between policy and technical inputs and science. And that is very critical, both from a resilience point of view, but also from a synergies point of view. In the biodiversity space, there's a tendency with the 30 by 30 and the IUCN red lists and so on to focus on threatened species and threatened spaces. Whereas from the resilience and adaptation agenda, it's really important to focus more on the redundancy of species and their role in a given ecosystem. You need more than one pollinator. You need more than one plant that will do the fixation of soils and retention of water. And it's that redundancy in a way that I tend to call the ordinary species that restoration can pay attention to, which when we're focusing only on conservation is a little bit less the focus. And so I think that bringing together the policy with the technical and scientific community is absolutely key as well, so that as we evolve and learn from restoration exercises, we actually start becoming maybe a little bit more sophisticated or a little bit more natural in our restoration endeavors. And I think that this is something that Brazil is really demonstrating across the board through civil society engagement and others. And I'm really hoping that with over 75% of the deforestation in Brazil, in the Amazon deforestation frontier, that the arc of restoration will actually take into account, and that the PLANAVEG will actually also be really exemplars of how to do restoration well. We know we can never restore nature to its initial state, but we can try as much as possible. And then, you know, on the synergies side of things, that connects also to the fact that there was a drive in the restoration agenda initially, as was mentioned earlier by the opening remarks, to really focus on carbon. But now we're seeing the restoration agenda integrating aspects of biodiversity, integrating aspects of peoples and livelihoods and communities, and of resilience and adaptation. And I think this is really important. As we've seen in the stocktake on NDCs, we are not on a trajectory to stay within 1.5. We are probably going towards a beyond 1.5 trajectory, which means that ecosystems are going to be shifting. And we know that that restoration takes a long time for, you know, to pick up and for species to anchor themselves and to settle. And so it's also, as we bring in that synergies dimension, I think it's really important not to miss out on the adaptation and resilience side of things, and to recognize that there's both a shift in altitude and latitude of species. And so to think about what will be the ecosystems of the future in this area, what will be the agroecological climatic zone, and let's start to plan for that future and restore for that future, rather than restoring for the past. And so maybe lastly, and I might be missing on my promise not to take my full 8 minutes, maybe lastly, I think, you know, it's the big elephant in the room is always finance. And it's not only the quantity of finance. You've probably seen yesterday, we've launched our State of Finance for Forest report that reflects how a combination of multiple financial resources can support multiple forest agendas, from keeping forests standing with the TFFF, to reducing deforestation, or to rewarding the reduction of deforestation with jurisdictional RED, to payment for ecosystem services. And I think it's that combination. We really need to be very intentional with that combination of resources and what they are aiming for, what they are targeting. But also it's the quality of finance. And again, in the State of Finance for Forest report, we identify that there is less than 2% of forest finance that is flowing to indigenous peoples. So how finance flows and where it goes and for what is just as important as how much money flows. So, and I'll keep it at that. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Very, very good points. Thank you so much. And yeah, great. So now asking to Marshall Bernoult. Marshall, how can restoration accelerate progress under the 3 Rio Conventions while enhancing food security and climate resilience? And how FAO is supporting the UN Decade and countries to deliver progress in restoration as a nature-based solution?
Okay, thank you for the question, the multiple question in one question. Let me start first to thank the organizer, WWF, and all of you here present for inviting FAO to be present here. It's a really honor. We are just across the road here, so it's really nice to always share that space with WWF, because we have a lot of commonalities, at least in the food security angle. So this is why I will end my talk. But let me start putting the basis. So we are back in time, basically, because the UN Decade on Land Restoration started in 2021, but it was already a decision back to 2019 at the UN General Assembly. And just to read how it was to support, scale up effort to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation of ecosystem worldwide. So it's important to remind that because we will see all this connect with the different convention. So then FAO, yes, with UNEP we work together. The secretariat is based in Nairobi with my friend Natalia Alexieva. Previously she was at FAO, so we have also people that are really connected between the two agencies. From FAO side, how FAO support that, basically we have two technical divisions, forestry and land and water. So you already see the different components that you will need to activate to work on land restoration. So not only the trees, but also the support, the soil and the water to have access to, if you want to produce biomass without water, it will be always difficult. So this is one vision of land degradation and land restoration. You mentioned the three Rio Convention. You mentioned briefly the CBD. On the CBD, yes, there was a target 2 that is by 2030, the end of the land decade restoration, to have at least 30% of degraded terrestrial, inland, water, coastal, marine ecosystem under effective restoration. So we are far beyond only the terrestrial forest. It's really all kind of ecosystem. So really back to the definitions here, and it's on a CBD perspective, so ensuring that biodiversity is there. So we connect with what you were mentioning, pollination, but not only that. So all the different aspects that the biodiversity and the ecosystem services can be brought into that. Then we have the UNCCD. And the UNCCD started to work long ago in that. I remind Rio plus 20, there was already all the, at that time was a zero net land degradation that was transformed into land degradation neutrality. So they changed the concept, but basically it's the same. And it's echo exactly the decision on first try to avoid. This is the first thing that we have to do, and that might be the less costly, and go move up to the restoration. That is probably the most difficult and certainly the most costly. So on the UNCCD embark in that, but at COP16 they took a decision on decision 19, reinforcing this approach, so the land degradation neutrality, by calling for integrated landscape management that simultaneously enhance soil health, agricultural productivity, and drought resilience. So the UNCCD, you see, connect the landscape. So connect not on, do not divide any longer forest from one side and agricultural land from the other side. Because you can try all what you want, all you have in your hand to protect forest, to restore forest, but if the pressure remains because of agriculture is becoming more and more degraded, they will need more and more land. So basically the pressure will also increase on the forest. On Earth, it is as it is, it's not elastic. So basically when you use one piece of land for something, you cannot use for something else. So basically we need to look at that connectivity between the land, the agricultural, and the forest land. And this is really what UNEP is also doing and what FAO is doing, having that landscape approach in mind. Now, moving to the UNFCCC, and this is why we are here today. UNFCCC, it's a little bit more, let's say, less straightforward. Land degradation is a bit in different part of the UNFCCC. You have first the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on agriculture and food security. And here you have a call for, and it was the last workshop in Bonn, on holistic and systemic approach, where even if who is in the room is mostly negotiator from agriculture, they recognize that what I was mentioning, that land is unique, and basically that even if you work on purely the crop production, you need to consider the land as a whole, having a really holistic approach or landscape approach. When you will have to implement the solution, you have to look at the landscape where your solution have to be put. So it's not the same. And we have a system that is agroforestry, that is also, let's say, a blending approach between agriculture and forest. So you have trees on crop production. You have also the global goal on adaptation, where you have so far some discussion on indicators that are related to agriculture, land, and sometimes both in the same time. I sincerely hope that they will get out with something and that they will not just delete any sectoral approach and having just bigger approach, which is a risk here. You have the finance part. The Standing Committee of Finance organized this year, and FAO was hosting the Standing Committee of Finance Forum on rural areas and agriculture. And here there was also discussion on the UN decade and how it's connected with the agriculture and the forest part. And let me end with what is happening under that co-presidency that was unique. In all co-presidency, if you are following, you have the agenda of the co-presidency and you have the high-level champion agenda. In all COP, they were always disconnected. They were basically leading the high-level champion, their own agenda, non-state actor mostly, and the co-presidency having some priorities that were different from COP to COP. That COP, for the first time ever, they blended, they merged the agenda. So you have only one agenda, and they decided to have 6 axes, and the 6 axes echoing the global stocktake. So connecting to the official process of the negotiation. On that 6 axes, you have 2 that are really dealing with what we want to see on forest, on one on agriculture, and land restoration. And it's really interesting that the restoration part is under the agriculture one, where the forest is more on, they mentioned a little bit the TFFF, but they are also on fire, on stuff like peatland also is there. But if you look at what is happening on the axis 3 on agriculture, you have different plans to accelerate solution where they look at all the different network, coalition, partnership, working on that, on what they can bring. And Brazil supported a plan to accelerate solutions, so PASS in short, on that is the name is Raiz, which in Portuguese means roots. So we are really anchored on the ground, and it's all about restoration, but restoration of degraded crop on grassland. Because if you also do not fight that, you will have land degradation of forest behind. So basically, it's how to also improve the land we have to produce the food we eat to ensure that we will not tap on intact forest that we still have. So this is really important to have that. You have another plan to accelerate solution that led with by the Ministry of Agrarian Development called Terra. So Terra in Portuguese also means a lot. You all know the Terra, the music, Sebastião Salgado. So it's really, it's for the Brazilian culture, Terra, it's a word that is really positive and bring a lot of stuff on board. But that past Terra, it's on productive forest. On productive forest in the sense how we restore degraded land into transforming this in SAF or Sistemas Agroforestal. So this is really the idea. So to conclude, it's really good to see that very clear convergence. We were starting first on different vision, UNCCD, mostly dry land, CBD, mostly conservation, biodiversity, but now all moving toward a very holistic and landscape approach, considering that land degradation, land restoration should be land. It's really not only forest and agriculture, it has to be both if we want really to project ourselves on the future generation to be able to have food security, which means access, so quantity, quality of food, access to food, and the stability of those 3 elements. So I will stop here. I have more elements, but I guess we will go back. So this is what I want to share.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And what a great global perspective we had from UNEP and from FAO. And you framed so well all the synergies. Thank you so much for this great overview. And one thing that I love when we're talking about forest restoration is that the conversation navigates very fluently between mitigation and adaptation, right? So it's not something, oh, this is mitigation, this is adaptation. No, forest restoration is both and has to do with food production and so on and so forth. So now we're going to migrate to Brazil and Brazilian policies, and Rita is leading so many things at the Environmental Ministry. So Rita, Brazil has been positioning restoration as a unifying climate, biodiversity, and social inclusion agenda. How is Brazil translating national policies such as PLANAVEG into large-scale, territory-led implementation? And what signals does Brazil bring to COP30? Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having me here, being able to take part on this conversation. So I'm very happy with that. I think first I need to make a reflection on what is restoration, because when we had the discussions on PLANAVEG, I think PLANAVEG is the national plan for restoration of native vegetation. And PLANAVEG recognizes that in different territories, we're going to need different models of restoration. And then you reach a point, where do you draw the line? Where do you start treating it as advanced agriculture? I will call it advanced, because I think there is a point where we're discussing sustainable agriculture for countries like ours. And the model is also adjusting for agriculture. But then there is restoration. And I think there is a fuzzy line right now, my impression, and I wanted just to share with you on where these things stand. And the fuzzy line is mostly dependent on which convention you're talking about. Restoration, to me, is like a bridge discussion. It's the bridge between the three conventions. It can go beyond three. It could go to more, if we want to think about wetlands or migratory species and all that. And so I think PLANAVEG acknowledged different territories will need different models of restoration. And that's why when Brazil has put a ambitious claim to restore 12 million hectares by 2030, right? So where are these lands? Where are the opportunities for that? So when we conducted the discussions on PLANAVEG, we saw that 9 million hectares are connected to how we manage the rural areas. Is restoration connected to the forest code? Private lands is in private lands. Brazil has this code that basically demands that each private owner needs to contribute some share of the biodiversity conservation and natural resources. And that's why we have these two figures in the forest code of legal reserve and permanent protection areas, which basically impose, and I have to use this word because that's how the sector feels, it still feels, is an imposition on their private land to deal with conservation. Then we have about 1.5 million hectares on protected areas. Mind you, I'm talking about national parks, reserves, indigenous lands that already need to be restored. And these are the protected areas. And then there is 1.5 million, more or less, which will be mandatory lands, like non-designated lands that have been taken up by squatters. And then, as the government retake the land, it needs to be restored. And Brazil has been very creative on the mechanisms that all these different models can be accomplished. For one thing, for private land, we just approved the Cota de Reserva Ambiental, the environmental reserve quota, which is the extra, if you are a landowner and you have more land in protection than you are required by law, you can trade that land in the market. And you can, and another landowner that didn't follow the rule can buy that extra land from you. The service is not the land, in order to get its own property regular. Now, this is one model, I think, maybe someone could discuss this further, of environmental services. It's the payment for environmental services at the private land level. And the Forest Code says that any extra land, even restoration areas in any stage, can qualify. So basically, if the market is good, a landowner can decide that he's going to grow forest because it's better to him. Maybe he will pay more than cattle ranching, depending on where, because there is a lot of variation in areas. So that's one thing. The other innovative mechanism that Brazil has been using is restoration concessions, which basically establish areas where a company, a business, can restore and can use both the carbon credits and the resources, timber, non-timber forest products, is a concession, long-term, where you don't need to buy the land. You just need to implement the restoration. And it's also an incentive in terms of what we can do in terms of restoration. You can do that within the protected areas, indigenous lands and parks and reserves, but you can also do that as land that was non-designated becomes designated for restoration concessions. So I think these are mechanisms that basically, once they are fully operational, they will move the restoration agenda in the market, with the market, and bridging the conventions. Now, there is all the discussion about food security. And I have to say, I also think as the same discussion for timber, because as a hyper-diverse country, we have hardwoods that the market knows, and we have good quality timber that the market does not know, the lesser known species. This is something that is related to improving technology, scientific information, silviculture, bringing this to the attention of the market. And I make a parallel of timber with food, because you probably here are experiencing a whole bunch of Amazonian food for the first time. I know Brazil nuts and acai are global, but I bet you're eating fish and fruit and other nuts that you never ate. Well, so food security in a hyper-diverse country such as ours means a diverse system, and that's why agroforestry is such a key issue. So when it comes to innovative markets and food security, we are talking about a different agricultural model. Then, depending on how far we push the model, it can be restoration. And depending, it will not be restoration. It might be a consortium of species, but restoration is something else. And when Mauricio called me and I said, animal rights, it's because for tropical systems, you only will have functional, healthy, restored areas if you bring together the animals. these systems are absolutely dependent on the interactions. And not only animals, but fungi, mycorrhizae, bacteria in the soil fauna. So we need to think about healthy, restored areas. So we talk a lot at this stage that we are. We talk a lot about the plants, but we need to keep an eye on the fauna, because what's happening around the restored areas will be determinant to healthy, restored systems. So that's why we have been working with this concept of synergistic landscapes. Synergistic landscapes, as we proposed, are areas where we will try to implement the targets of the 3 Rio Conventions together, with the assumption that we will go farther, faster, if we do this implementation joint. But we have to be very careful to not double count. So we need to establish clear indicators for each one, and then monitor and make sure that we are implementing the targets according to each convention and not fuzzing them all. But synergistic landscapes will be more sustainable landscapes, and are landscapes where different management regimes can coexist. And then, of course, agriculture has to be part of synergistic landscapes. Cities have to be part of synergistic landscapes. Forestry and diverse food production. So they are landscapes of coexistence between different interests. But not all of them will be restoration landscapes, right? Because they organize themselves around core areas of solid, good representations of the native vegetation of each biome and each region. I think I stop here.
Great. Thank you so much, Rita. And I'm always super impressed with kind of portfolio of possibilities that you and the Brazilian government is creating for forest restoration. Forest code, concessions, financial incentives, so many things, agroforestry. And I love the concept of synergic landscape. So we'll bring to our internal discussions. That's super important. Okay. And finally, Professor Anjali, from the UK scientific and policy perspective, what are the essential elements needed to ensure that restoration truly delivers for climate, biodiversity, and people, strengthening synergies across these agendas and accelerating the global shift from commitments to real, high-integrity implementation on the ground? And in this context, how can applied science, evidence, and innovation improve transparency, monitoring, and the effectiveness of restoration at scale? Sorry for a long question, but
Thank
you
you.
have the floor.
Is this on? Yes. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. First of all, can I just say it's a huge delight for me to be able to be here. It was probably almost 30 years ago that I begged my way into an internship with WWF India in the forests of central India, which I remember from my childhood. It's where my family is from, and I remember as a child seeing lush forests and where you would see tigers just around in the nearby areas. And then by the time I was doing that internship in the late 90s, of course, these forests were heavily degraded, and you would find you'd be lucky to see as many trees as you used to see tigers. And so it is very much for me real to think about restoration, how we can recover those immense landscapes that really shaped my entire life and set me down this trajectory. And so it is a huge honor to be here with all of you halfway through this UN decade of ecosystem restoration. And also with the 3 decades that we have now of reflection, since the signing of those 3 Rio Conventions on climate, on biodiversity, and on desertification. And of course, in those 3 decades, nearly every country on the planet has really focused incredible energy on tackling these intertwined challenges of climate change and land degradation, biodiversity loss. And we have accomplished quite a lot, but there is, of course, quite a lot more to do. Now, I should confess that over those 3 decades, since those days of my WWF internship, I've primarily been an academic researcher. And my research is really about, I'm a biodiversity scientist looking at species evolution over large time scales, large time and spatial scales, and looking at the interactions between species, between different levels of biological organization, between their environment and between their climate. And so the messages that all of the other speakers have said really about those interactions of these different factors has very much been at the core of my work for a few decades. But I think like every person who spends a long time studying biodiversity, you get to the point where you think, I really could be doing more, which is why I've now moved into the current policy role, or the current role that I have as Chief Science Advisor for the UK Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And what is clear from anybody, again, who studies biodiversity is that we all appreciate here is that biodiversity loss is happening faster than ever before in human history. And this is presenting immense challenges, obviously, for biodiversity itself, for the environment, and for people and economies around the world. Now, scientists have been raising alarm bells for a while now that we are entering the 6th mass extinction. Now, as one of those scientists and somebody who has studied past mass extinctions, and it's one of my areas of expertise, please believe me when I say we don't use those words lightly. As somebody, I don't know how many of you have ever looked at a mass extinction written in the rock record, but it is stark, right? When you can see clearly the biodiversity, the species in one unit, and then see the very clear layer where those are all disappearing. And we don't just look at how they disappear. Actually, most of my work has been focused on looking at what are the factors, what are the functions, what are the ecologies that really specify what species will survive, what species will go extinct, and what are the species that will recover quickly. Now, when we talk about recovery in those timescales, though, what we're looking at are hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, tens of millions of years. And on the one hand, again, as a scientist, I know that nature will recover from this, if we let this mass extinction play out, but it won't look anything like what it looks like today, or it won't look like what it looked like in our past. And what we do absolutely know is that we will not do well in that situation. So I actually, although my heart is very much focused on nature, my concerns are more for people as we go through this crisis. Now, of course, I'm not alone in that fear. We are increasingly aware that people are not immune to the impacts of biodiversity loss. Rather, the biodiversity loss and the associated impacts on ecosystem resilience are a huge threat to our own well-being, to our economies, to our growth. So we know recently the Green Finance Institute reported on nature-related financial risks to the UK, and highlighting that the continued degradation of nature harms not only the environments, but our collective prosperity, right? So, for example, compromising the resilience of our farmers and increasing prices and compromising our food security. These risks, of course, go beyond those created just by the physical damage to our environments, and they extend to things like litigation risks and transition risks by companies. And actually, those risks may start to have a greater impact on our GDP than things like the global financial crisis. And so we cannot ignore nature. It has to be embedded in our discussions about growth and prosperity. Now, looking at it from the scientific perspective, I think UK and international science increasingly is thinking about these cascading risks from the degradation of ecosystems into food, health, and water. And we know that all of these risks raise our volatility in terms of trade and global production. The World Economic Forum, for example, reported that environmental risks are among the most severe global risks over the coming 10 years. And I want to point out a report that was published last month by the University of Exeter, looking at global tipping points, which emphasize that the world is perilously close or may have already passed some negative tipping points. And of course, this is something that we should all be concerned about. Again, thinking about this just from the perspective of past tipping points, we know that once we get to get past these tipping points, it is very hard to recover and restore healthy, resilient ecosystems. They also, however, point out that every one of these tipping points of danger can be mirrored by a tipping point of opportunity. That if forests are at risk, their regeneration can unlock carbon removal, biodiversity recovery, and sustainable prosperity. And of course, it has been measured by the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration that restoration yields rapid, measurable gains. So every 1 pound invested in ecosystem recovery can deliver up to 9 pounds in benefits. So we know that without nature, there is no healthy economy, there is no food, there is no health, there is no society. And this is, of course, recognized in the 30 by 30 agenda, and we are working hard to make sure we achieve those goals in the UK. And I should point out that the 30 by 30 agenda is not just simply about 30% of land being preserved for biodiversity. We have to make sure it's actually the right amount of, right areas of land, the ones that can really help us restore our ecosystems. And this is where scientific data and understanding is going to be really critical and something that we're working very hard to do. So we can all appreciate, of course, that restoration is not a side issue. It's a cross-cutting, nature-based solution that really delivers for all of our global ambitions, our biodiversity goals, and in fact has huge impacts on social inclusion in terms of a just transition for land use and agriculture. And I think it's important to recognize that we often talk about nature as the victim, but nature is not just a victim. I mean, obviously it is a victim of our human activities, but it is also the solution. So nature-based solutions could really deliver over 1/3 of the emissions reductions that we need by 2030. And then, of course, it has all those added benefits of restoring ecosystems, providing clean water, providing food, and providing resilience. So how do we actually do this? And this goes back to really my area of expertise, thinking about those interactions, those networks. And as we heard in the very beginning, the functions that different species perform in an ecosystem are going to be very important to this. Now, coming into government, and I've only been in role for about 4 months, coming into this role, what was really striking to me was how we treat all of these individual aspects in silos. We try to fix this problem, this problem, this problem. We don't recognize these are all part, well, even if we recognize that we don't necessarily build policies that recognize that cohesive whole, that entire system of integrated aspects of species, of biotic and abiotic factors that are absolutely critical to have resilient, healthy ecosystems. Now, I also want to bring in, obviously, the climate change angle here, because when we talk about nature recovery, I think it is really important that we remember that we aren't going to completely recover the ecosystems, the nature that we remember in our youth, right? Climate has changed, and some of those ecosystems are not entirely recoverable in their original state, but we can rebuild healthy ecosystems that capture a lot of those aspects that are functional, that allow nature to thrive and allow people to thrive alongside nature. So we need to make sure that we bring in the best science, the most cutting-edge new science, to inform those decisions that we make to rebuild those healthy ecosystems, and don't just have a blind perspective of trying to replicate what we lost 30, 40 years ago, or what we remember from 30 or 40 years ago. And that's a hard thing to recognize, but it's important that we do that. It's important that we use the best science to inform those decisions. So I just want to touch briefly really on what we're doing in the UK on these areas. So of course we are trying to embed nature positive approaches in our policies in many different ways through legally binding targets in the Environment Act, our local nature recovery strategies, and landscape recovery projects. One of the ones that I think is really interesting is our biodiversity net gain policy, which requires developers to not only have no harm or not negatively impact their habitats or their areas, but actually to rebuild, to improve them by 10%, to make sure that recovery is embedded in our policies is how we really achieve restoration. In July, we published a report unlocking the benefits for people, nature, and climate, which really shows how joining up all of our different policies will deliver all of our larger scale goals in terms of economic growth, as well as really healthy, clean air and water and food. And so we want to keep on working in those ways. Now, again, my role is to make sure that the scientific community is really embedded in those policies. So one of the things that I'm working on very heavily with lots of academics, with our policy teams, is looking at how we can go from these siloed approaches into a more ecosystem approach to our recovery to make sure what we're building is actually resilient, is actually capable of restoring restoring these ecosystems that can deal with variation, can deal with change in a way that we currently aren't able to do so. But that means that we need to slightly reconsider, we have a good approach, but we need to maybe have our approaches able to take this broader view. So our policies are largely, I would say, based on what we could accomplish with data and with monitoring over a decade ago. But even looking at when the UN Decade of Restoration started, what we can do today is so much better. We have AI poses lots of risks to the environment, but it also presents a huge amount of opportunity in terms of how we can quickly analyze data, how we can collect data from images, and how we can change our approaches to monitoring. Now in the UK, we have the Natural Capital Ecosystem Assessment Program, which is giving us an incredible amount of data on our natural capital. And we have, as part of that, we are doing things like making sure that people live within 15 minutes of green spaces and all kinds of things to benefit people. But we're also going to use that to better understand how we can build better models and metrics of healthy ecosystems and not just individual elements. And so those are some of the things that we're really focusing on to make sure that the best science is informing our policies and that we're always updating our policies so that we can incorporate the best science. And that is very much about building healthy ecosystems and not just trying to tackle individual problems that are all inherently integrated. Thank you.
For just a final round, I'll make just one question for all of you. And we've been trying here in our Panda Pavilion to always have, like in the final remarks, forward-looking in terms of concrete steps that can be done. So please keep your intervention now brief because you're getting to the top of the time. But my question is to all of you, what concrete step will you, your country or institution take over the next year? And we were talking the importance of next year right before, right? To help shift global restoration from commitments to large-scale delivery over the second half of the UN Decade on ecosystems restoration. One thing or one or two key and concrete steps that you're going to put forward next year. Who want to start? You want to start? Let's follow the same.
Sure. Sure, why not? I think for us it's going to be two things. One is to continue advocating on the synergistic implementation. And here I would like to steal something that Rita said once back in September. There's a lot of focus on carbon, and it's not a bad thing because carbon is a metric that is very easy. But we need gourmet carbon. We need to shift towards gourmet carbon, and this is something that we've been advocating in UNEP and that we will continue doing so that the price of carbon reflects not only what is the material store in ecosystems, but also the diversity that comes around it. The second thing is related to finance, is to continue testing and applying and failing sometimes at blending finance, combining, sequencing different sources of finance, because we're still not there yet when it comes to private finance. And so combining the public and private funding and different financial flows is something that we will continue trying.
Great. And UNEP's role on this is super important. So thank you so much. Yep.
Okay, so can be long, but let me the vision. So now we are really working. We understood that if we want to change the things, we cannot work in isolation on policy, on finance, on science. We need to activate those three pillars together. Because if you don't have good data, you will never be able to monitor what is happening. You are not able to influence and have good policy. If you don't have good policies that recognize, for instance, land restoration, you will never attract any investment on that because the investor will say, your policy is not supporting that, so why I should invest in something that is not even backed up by your policy. So this is where we are really working. And to do that is not FAO alone, it's impossible. So even if we are big organization, big organization, we have to work all of us together. So this is a way, partnership. So we have to implement strong partnership to be able to tackle that challenge, to address the 3 pillars for the benefits of people that are in the center of the triangle. So this is really the vision we have. An immediate step next year on the science part, we are organizing with IPCC in June an expert meeting to update what is new on land. Because the last cycle of IPCC, we have the special report on land, food security, but it was 2019 with a cut-off date for science of 2018. So since 2018 and nowadays, we have plenty of new science, evidence, metrics available that we can activate. So as there is no new special report on land, FAO, we decided to reach out to IPCC and they accepted. So in June next year, we will have that expert meeting to discuss those aspects. What is new? What are the gaps?
Fantastic, very concrete. Looking forward to this. That sounds good. Rita,
2 things. One, but there is one that I'm I'm hopeful, is that nature is at our side when it comes to restoration. And we already have, when you look at the analysis of natural regeneration in Brazil, we already accomplished our target. But that is not secure. So one thing for next year is that we need to advance securing these secondary forests into the landscapes. They are the most diverse, they are the cheapest, they are a work of nature, and they will help us reach our target. So I think when I think about delivering restoration next year, I would go with secondary forests in the landscape and working policies that guarantee they will continue in the landscape, because secondary forests have a very fast turnover. And the other one is the landscapes, is looking into the landscapes. Really, we should focus on improving the interconnectivity, the dialogue, and the resolution of conflicts within these landscapes, so that we can show that we can have peace landscapes. In Brazil, there is a lot of conflict in terms of different visions for future. Different sectors are implementing their visions without care for the visions of other sectors. These synergistic landscapes can be landscapes for peace, helping us to create dialogue among the different visions so that coexistence can happen. And only with coexistence, we will have the synergies that we need to face the critical crisis, the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, and the desertification and degradation. So I want to work for peace landscapes with restoration.
wow. Beautiful, I love it. So good, Rita, thank you. And I also very interested on this securing secondary forests, because that's a scale in Brazil, right? That's a scale that has great potential for scale and requires less investment. So super interesting. Anjali, please, your...
Okay. Well, I think I will repeat the themes that others have mentioned. So I would say if we were going to name 2 or 3 things that we'll be doing over the next year, finance is a key part of this. Actually looking at nature markets, the biodiversity net gain policy has already generated markets for biodiversity credits. And this is an area that will be a huge focus for the UK government going forward. And so we're already looking at additional policies along those lines to make sure that we value our national capital and create those markets to bring the money in to fund these projects. So that's a key aspect. Another key aspect is breaking down the silos between biodiversity, climate, water, and land. As I said, we often think of these as separate. We build policies that deal with them separately. We understand, obviously, from the scientific perspective, that those are false partitions. And so a lot of our work going forward will be very much about looking across those different silos, how to bridge them, build cohesive policies, metrics, and models, and also making sure that as part of breaking down silos that we are working very closely with local communities in implementing policy and developing and implementing policies. So breaking down silos is another key aspect. And I would say the last one would be what we're undertaking right now is a huge review of our monitoring across the country, and looking at how we can embed new technologies and new approaches into how we monitor, measure, and improve nature to, again, make sure that we are using the best possible approaches to actually achieve those goals in a sustainable way. So something that isn't just kind of temporary fixes, but really getting to the roots of the problem. And that means that that represents a huge R&D investment by the government, and that's certainly going to be a major focus of this next year as well.
Great. Excellent. And I love this breaking down silos. I think that's a message that we're all taking from the COP30. To foster synergies, we need to break down silos. So thank you so much. We still have some time, and that's great when we have time to open for questions from the audience. So anyone would like to make a question to the panel? You can make for all of them or just for one or some of them. Anyone?
Let me see if this works. Yeah. Thank you so much. I learned a lot from you, and I had a great time here, hearing your points. I wanted to ask, and then anyone could answer, or everybody can answer, something about cost of opportunity, right? When we think here in Brazil, private landowners end up making decisions that make most sense to them, and a lot of that is money-driven, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have so much degraded land, right? It's more about what pays more. So what is your view on tackling that, right? It is a human thing, right? Greed. I don't know if animals have greed, but humans do. So how do you see us tackling that? Because it's you know, a human issue that it's not so easy, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on cost of opportunity and how to tackle that.
But this is a central point. You will never convince any small-scale farmer, big-scale farmer to change the practice without having a clear idea for him what will be the benefits for him. So, well, I'm talking about agriculture, but forest the same. If you want to implement practices that will tackle biodiversity, climate change, the first thing is benefits. So how to ensure that we have the benefits? And we can say differently. Ask a farmer if you want to save the planet, but the farmer will respond to you. Do you want to save my family? Then save me, save my family. I need a system that is resilient to cope with the climate change that is already here, and then I will bring the solution. So we need to develop more studies on cost. What are the costs of the different options? Because we have options that we can scale quickly, but the price is so high for the moment that it's not the right moment. On the other side, we have opportunities that are at a low cost that can be really deployed, and that can be even a co-benefit that you can be paid for. So this is basically what I would tell you on that. I have a longer answer, but...
Yeah. Thank you, Marshall. And FAO has been deeply involved on talking directly to farmers, and I think this is a big question. And anyone else? Yeah?
Sure. I mean, I completely agree that you can't expect people to do things that hurt their families, right? And you know, many of my uncles are farmers in India, and it's a hard life, right? It's extremely, there aren't huge profits in it, and once you throw in variable climate patterns, it becomes extremely difficult. And so we have to find solutions that actually work for people and also work for the environment. And that probably means actually valuing nature differently, valuing natural capital differently. And those are solutions that people are looking at. But we have to find solutions that don't cause people to take on harm to themselves while benefiting everybody else. We have to have value to that as well.
Well, I think being a farmer is very hard. But I think countries like Brazil have changed the meaning of opportunity cost through the policies that were implemented for that specific sector. So we all know the proportion of our budget that goes into supporting the sector with subsidies and all that. So there is a lack of perception of the opportunity with other ways of using the land. And then, of course, like Brazil is one very vulnerable country to climate change. But rarely you see a connection between extreme events, disasters, and climate change. So it's like a disgrace sent by God upon a region. But rarely people establish the connection. And even like all the security, like all the insurance for the land is not making that connection. If that happens, then opportunity cost will change. The perception of opportunity cost will change. But if we keep doing it the way we are doing it, it's very difficult, I suspect, almost impossible that will do, because you don't relate what you're doing with what is happening in the land. I'm sorry if I'm being a little bit activist here, but it's because I think we need to make these opportunities equal. The way it is now, the system, they are not.
Can I pick up on that actually a bit more? I think one of the things actually that I have observed quite a lot actually from the scientific perspective is that we have immense research in novel ways of farming, of finding nature-based solutions to degradation of land that actually return better crop yields, better profits, etc. But there is this barrier between having that translated into the field. And so I will often go to a talk that will have great ideas for ways of improving your yields, improving adaptability. And actually, very often, if I'm going to talks in India, for example, it will be from the perspective of how can you do this without having a high cost. So what is the realistic amount that a farmer can spend in new technologies or new approaches to farming? And there are ways of doing that. But we don't translate that effectively because we don't necessarily have those partnerships in place. So I think having a partnership, a real sustained partnership between the research and agricultural approaches and the people who are actually, in the field is critical to actually making it easy for people to do the right thing, I think is what we haven't actually cracked yet. But we have the capacity, we have the knowledge, I think.
Back to your question, on specifically to Brazil, to give you a concrete example. So we need to have credit line, and we need to have public money to show us the way, then we have to blend with private finance. So in Brazil, you have BNDES, for instance. BNDES, they have credit line targeting even agroecology, for instance. It's untapped. We have a new credit line, Banco do Brasil. It will be Caminho Verde. So here you need to think. You need to understand why BNDES is not having such an amount of requests. They have the money, but the requests are not there. An issue, CAR, so the Cadastro Rural, so land tenure, the recognition. So we have to solve. It's not having only the credit line, you need to have all the enabling factors. Banco do Brasil, Caminho Verde, fine. You need to have indicators to ensure that those will go to real restoration and not to kind of restoration that might not be a real restoration. So being a little bit activist. So you need also indicators. So that's why you need science, and that will have clear metrics to follow on the three pillars. So economic, social, and agro-environmental. So this is what we need. So the finance, and then the public finance will show the way to the private finance. It should not be the reverse. So.
Excellent. Wow. And that question was great. Triggered a lot of good, very interesting, important reflections. Well, we are getting to the end of this first panel of the Forest Restoration Day here in the Panda Pavilion. I'm not going to summarize, but I think, I also learned a lot. I think you gave us a great perspective, big picture of all the big issues related to forest restoration, from synergies, convention synergies, to importance of finance, of good policy, of good data and science, of a good perspective on the territories and local people, communities. So very wide perspective that will be further developed along the day. So each of the panel along the day will actually take some of those perspectives and get into deep reflections and considerations. So really appreciate everyone that is following, also everyone that is following online. This is being live streamed, so that's fantastic that we have a good audience also following us online that's not able to be here. So really appreciate the presence and attention of all of you. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your perspectives. It was a great panel. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Mauricio. Thanks, Kirsten, as well, and thanks to the panelists. We'll have a short, first the picture, but yeah, I'll just highlight that we have a short break of 30 minutes until the next session. There are some food still in there. It's a miracle, but we do still have some food in here. So feel free to eat something, to have something to drink, and then we'll be back in at 11.